Hi, it's Paul Banis of GreatDad.com, and thank you very much for joining either the podcast or the YouTube version of the podcast. I'd really appreciate it if you took just a second to subscribe either on your podcast app or in YouTube. It doesn't really do anything. It's not going to send you any emails. It's just going to show up more often on your feed, and it does me a lot of good in terms of getting more exposure for this work I do to support dads. I'd also like to invite you to come to my page, GreatDad.com/go, if you'd like to discuss more about any of the issues that we are covering within the podcast, especially if there's any way I can help you to be a sounding board in your own struggles to be a dad and to be there for your family. So take a look at that. It also includes a link to my course on gratitude, where at GreatDad.com/gratitude with a offer to take that course for free. So see you in a second. Hey, it's Paul Banis of GreatDad.com, and I'm here with my weekly series talking to dads about modern fatherhood. And I've got an expert today to talk to us about a little bit about coaching and about masculinity, but also about the importance of men's groups. So welcome, Jason Lange.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I was really intrigued with your background because I think this is so important, and I know a lot of men are in men's groups, but then I know a lot of men don't even know they exist, or maybe they're worried that they're going to be some, drum beating ceremony or off in the woods taking their clothes off, or some weird stuff that they really feel very uncomfortable about. So maybe let's start out with what is a men's group and what is the wide variety of men's groups that exist out there?
It's a fantastic question because that term, kind of like use the term meditation. It's like, well, what kind? There's so many
Yeah,
different
right.
ways to meditate, so many different configurations of men's groups, some of which we can talk more specifically about. But the most basic orientation I often give is um, a lot of the challenge for us guys, including fathers, is most of us are taught as men to relate to other men through triangulation. So
Hmm.
me and you have our attention on some third thing, a
Right.
sporting activity, a game on TV, fixing a car, fishing, whatever that is. So our connection is built by us putting our attention on this third thing, which can be fun and is great, right? In a lot of ways,
Yeah.
but it misses our attention isn't necessarily on each other.
Hmm.
So many men I work with have this experience of, oh yeah, I just spent the weekend with my buddies or I went out last night. And yet I come home and I'm still feeling terribly alone. Like my wife's about to leave me and they don't even know.
Yeah.
Like that's common stuff that we're just suffering inside as men. So a men's group, in a lot of ways, one of the most basic definitions is we take that and we turn our attention on each other.
Yeah.
So as men, we put our attention on, hey, you know, what's going on for you, Paul? Where are you in pain in life right now? What are you celebrating? What's in the way? What's hard? And we actually connect with each other with the orientation that we just want to support each other,
Yeah.
right? So we support each other when we're feeling challenged and we hold each other accountable when there's something important we want to move forward in life. And there's lots of configurations then for how we do that as men. Some groups are more accountability based, some groups are more kind of presence based, some groups are more traditional support groups, some are more practice groups, meaning we're going to get together and we're going to do embodiment practices or meditate or really deepen with each other. But what I've found is what makes it so meaningful is when we turn that attention on each other. And then as men, we use our presence and skills and capacities to guide each other deeper into our felt body experience of just, this is what's true in my body right now. And that is often completely transformative for guys because suddenly they have a space to feel and to share and to not have to hold it all inside, which poisons, men over time. And we fall into these roles, particularly I think as dads, if we come last, right? It's like I got to take care of my kids, I got to take care of my spouse, I got to take care of my work. And then inside, we are often just dying. We're not getting enough sleep, we're not getting enough, not necessarily taking care of ourselves, aren't getting some of our needs met. And one of the big paradigm shifts I see specifically for dads that come into men's group is, oh, I have a place I can go to be held,
Yeah.
which is very confronting for some men. Like, what do you mean be held? I can't show weakness.
Yeah. I'm sure that people who are just tuning in already are like, I don't want any of this, because it just is. It's very, very uncomfortable for a lot of guys. And I guess we should just acknowledge that that's it's maybe not as healthy as we'd like it to be, but it's very normal and very common. I mean,
Yes.
if you've ever been hurting in your profession or in your personal life, and maybe you're having problems with your spouse or your kids or your job or feeling insecurities or whatever, and you've mentioned that to a friend during a moment of vulnerability, and had that friend kind of look at you and be like, I just I don't want to even talk about this, or give you that kind of
Yeah.
that signal like, I'm not interested in your issue. You realize the value of it, but it is in that vulnerability that you can you kind of can grow as a person, get that support you need. I think it's important what you said about the fact that there are all these different types. I'm not only the modalities in terms of how you get into it with feeling your body and meditation and all those types of practices, but also that there are groups for almost every type of situation. You're going through a divorce, or you just had
Yes.
a baby, or you're getting older, or it's a networking group. I think it's important to talk about how those that vulnerability can start to feel okay, because I think, like we said, a lot of men would feel uncomfortable about this, and getting into one of those groups and sitting down. It's kind of like going to the first AA meeting where it's like, oh, I don't want to get up there and bare my soul. How does that organically happen in a group usually? Do people usually start out together as a cohort, and they kind of ease it in, starting to talk about, the football game or whatever, and then it gets into something deeper? Or is it like right off the bat, first question, hey, what's your pain today?
Yeah, it depends on the group, in a sense. Sometimes the groups that can go the deepest are kind of cohort based. So it's the same group of men who are going to be meeting over time, which does have the benefit of we get to build rapport and trust with
Right.
each other. But, I lead a lot of retreats, a lot of one-off weekend kinds of things, and it doesn't have to be that way,
Yeah.
right? When the container is set right, so when men feel safe, which I know is a thing a lot of guys are like, what are you talking about? But we need to feel safe as men, right? The reason we aren't vulnerable a lot of times is because maybe we tried it once and it wasn't safe and someone attacked us for it or made fun of us for it
Yeah.
or pulled away for it. But when we have a safe space, what I've seen is, um, it, honestly, it's kind of like dominoes. All it takes is
Yeah.
one man who steps in to his deeper truth and vulnerability in the moment and reveals and feels. And that what that'll often do is give permission to other men where they're like, oh, we're not messing around here. If he shared that, I can probably share something too. And it starts to kind of ricochet through the group is what I've noticed is one man is, vulnerable, which the crazy thing is in these safe containers, what guys start to realize is vulnerability is just another word for courageous.
Let's back up just a second, because you use that word safe, and I think it's really important. It's an important word. Like, safe from what? I mean, are we talking about safety in terms of like, I like an old fashioned kind of like, if I'm vulnerable, my seatmate might kill me because he realizes a
Mm-hmm.
thing there? Is it a fear of femininity, of actually feeling things and being more womanly, and therefore being called out for, any number of
Yeah.
majority terms that we could think of? Are there other things about safety that are important to talk about that make men shy away from this?
Incredibly good question. Totally. I think for a lot of guys, that stems from, some of the expectations of men, but a fear of being labeled, judged, shamed.
Yeah.
For there's all kinds of things that create this context for us men, but one of the big proponents is often other men, particularly in those adolescent years where we have to learn to hold everything in. Because if I share anything that's not quite perfect or vulnerable, I might get attacked, ostracized, or bullied, quite literally. And
Right.
many men that come into my groups have that. They're like, being in a room with other men just in itself feels dangerous
Yeah.
because this was a threat to me in the past. So when I say safety, I don't mean that there's not going to be conflict, that there might not be challenge. My favorite definition of this that I ever heard was just safety isn't the absence of threat, it's the presence of connection. So safety starts to mean, oh, whatever I bring forward here, I'm not going to be ostracized for it. I'm not going to be
Yeah.
kicked out. I'm not going to be made fun of or shamed of being less than. I'm going to be able to stay in connection. And when guys start to realize that, a whole different side of them often comes forward.
I think there's also a part of us too when we're in those situations. If you've ever participated in something where somebody is sharing, you yourself may have critical thoughts of like, what a jerk, or what
Yep.
that's so weak, or why didn't you stand up to him, or you're thinking those critical thoughts, and therefore when it's your turn to talk, you're thinking like, God, I imagine they're going to all be saying those same things about me. How do we get over that fear? Because it's going to happen. I mean, we're thinking people, we're critical people, and even in the most
Yeah,
the most accepting situations, when you're with your kids or with your spouse, and you're totally, you're into it, you still think critical thoughts that if you voice them, they wouldn't be helpful.
totally.
So how do we get over that? I guess fear
Yeah,
that other people are exactly as flawed as we are.
totally. And it can happen, right? I mean, that's the honest truth. You may get judged. Um, but the core ingredient here, which then becomes part of the culture, at least in the groups I lead, is it takes courage. It takes
Hmm.
speaking our truth, even when it's scary. And that courage in itself is the value. And that often what I've seen as men see other men step into courage, they become more courageous. And so it
Hmm.
starts to rewrite the script. Then we match that with, again, another deeper kind of cultural creation in the group of realizing that, it's not always this simple, but oftentimes where we're most triggered or most judging is often something inside of ourselves we're not okay with,
Yeah.
right? So
Or you
there's a
got to learn.
piece,
Yeah. And you've got to
there's
learn
a,
to recognize the fact that you are triggered by that. What does that mean? What do you do with that information? That person is
yep,
saying something. Your automatic response is, oh, I hate that, or I fear that, or I don't like that, or whatever. What does that tell? Is that useful information, or does it
yeah,
help? Does it help move forward with your connection with them? And that's what I lead groups as well, especially in the area of positive intelligence, where you're trying to hear those
right,
triggers for the first time, because they usually are just emotional
yeah.
brains going on all the time, and just starting to recognize that is, I would guess you would say that's part of the men's group process too.
Yeah, totally. I mean, again, there's a cultural component in terms of creating norms around learning to identify and own our judgments, criticisms, stories, that
Hmm.
we're doing this all the time, right, out in the world. And the great thing about a men's group is whatever we're doing out in the world is going to show up in the group, but it's in a way you get to work with it, where you get to own it. Like, hey, I'm really judging you for not standing up to your boss. And then that becomes a piece of work, right, between the two of you. Sometimes that might be gold for you. Sometimes it might be gold for the other man. But the idea is we bring it all to the surface and we learn to start to work with that and get in tune with our reactivities. Why am I so um, why do I get so charged up when I see someone not standing up for themselves?
Yeah.
Right? When we take that on as a self-inquiry, there's almost always gold at the
Hmm.
end,
Yeah.
right? There's something to learn about ourselves, our past, our history, um, or even just how it impacts our nervous system that we can then work with.
Yeah, I know both of us would agree that this is a very important work, whether it's in men's group or in some other coaching experience, or in therapy, of work we really need to do as dads to be better dads. Talk a little bit about why you personally feel that. You've got a baby and a 5-year-old. I'm a little bit down the road, so I've seen some of the effect of that, but you're feeling it
Yeah,
for the
I
first
mean,
time.
I would say just in my own personal experience recently, a realization I had was that when I'm under resourced as a father, I will default and regress back to parenting the way I was parented, right? It's like, which in my family was neglect and shame. Like those are, and when I see myself doing this, you started to catch myself using those as strategies for my daughter in particular. And I was like, whoa, that's intense. And I don't want to do that. So one of the best ways I've found to not do that is to get resourced as a man, which means for me, going to my men's groups, getting connected, bringing my challenges to other men and having them support me. And so one of the big things I see with a group is it changes the way we parent. I just got this frame. I was doing some, again, wanting to become a better parent and studying some stuff. And they talked about adult tantrums. Adults have tantrums too. And then it just hit me like a ton of bricks, feeling all the times that my nervous system got overwhelmed, just like my daughters did, or just like my sons did. And then I would have a tantrum, right? Which is like acting out, and I would act out on her. And so a men's group is a place where we, as men, as dads, get to get resourced and actually get challenged when we need to get challenged. And also, yeah, be held when we're like, I am terrified. I just lost my job and I have two kids who are relying on me and I'm in a panic and I don't know what to do. And if we don't have that place to allow that feeling to come forward, this is, probably something you see when we choose not to feel a feeling for whatever reason, right? Emotional content, grief, fear, anger, whatever that is, the way we prevent ourselves from feeling it is by tightening up our bodies. If you see a little kid crying and you're like, stop crying, what do? They hold their breath and they tighten up their system. And that's what holds it inside. And this has a cumulative effect in men. And so many guys, so many dads I know, right? When you're in your 20s, it's like, yeah, I got a certain amount of energy and I can just party and I can work hard and all this stuff. Man, you start to hit your late 30s, 40s, 50s, it doesn't fly like that anymore. The bills come due. And any of that tension we're holding inside, it takes energy to hold. Right? This is a simple example I often give guys, Paul. Any listeners can do it now, where if you just imagine you're sitting here and I'm like, okay, tense up all the muscles in your body. Contract your biceps, contract your core, shoulders. And it's like, okay, this isn't too bad. Now, if I'm like, okay, now hold this for the next hour.
Yeah.
Within a couple minutes, it's exhausting. Exhausting. Right. And so many fathers in particular, I think, are holding so much the burden of being a provider, a father, a husband, not necessarily having been given the right modeling or training or tools for how to do that in a healthy way. And they're just overloaded, grinding through on life. And we just wear ourselves down. And, we'll turn to substances if it gets too strong, alcohol, weed, porn, masturbation, overworking, or it'll just start to show up in our body. We'll have no energy, we'll get depressed, we'll have autoimmune disorders, gut orders, achy backs, these things that actually start to stop us and try to slow us down. So a men's group gives men a place to go, I've just seen, to get resourced, where no one needs anything from you. This is such a rare, precious space for a father to go into a space where there is no demand on me. Nobody needs me to be present or to handle this or that or show up. And I just get to be. I just get to be. Whether that's sad or in a foul mood or grumpy or angry, I get to be that, right? I get to be that. And that can be so healing for guys when they have no space to do that anywhere else.
So do you do groups with just fathers, or is it just random, some fathers, some single, and they all are together?
I personally tend to lead more mixed groups, but I've been in groups of just new fathers or long-term fathers, and it's incredibly valuable. I mean, my first child was born in 2019, 2 months before COVID. Month in, we discovered she was deaf, got diagnosed, shattered so many of our expectations. And I think, God, that I was in a men's group, because I had older men like you who were kind of on the other side, who maybe hadn't had that same exact experience, but had been through some very intense things with their children, fears about health or outcomes or whatnot. And just having a place to be held by older men who are like, yeah, man, I know how terrifying that is. And I've been there.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's it. Not even giving me advice, but just, I've been there and I'm right there with you, would just soothe my soul. Just like, oh my God, I feel held. I feel like I have a place to go. If my kid's freaking out in the middle of the night, I got men to call who are like, how did you deal with this? And they're like, yeah, sometimes this works, sometimes this work, or I never figured it out. And that sounds painful, man. Sorry for you. And it's like, yeah, thank you. I feel seen. So what I found is, I think one of the sweetest spots I have seen and participated in is particularly groups for new fathers.
Mhm.
If you've never had a kid before and there's that like looming, it's all about to change. I don't know what to expect. Can be totally overwhelming. It
Yeah.
was for me. There was so much nobody told me in terms of, my hormone profile changing, testosterone dipping, how much oxytocin I had in my system, and then how hard it was to work. Of just like, I got no go energy in me. I just want to like cuddle this baby. Nobody prepared me for that. That was one thing that had been missed in my groups, but I often talk a lot about now with men I work with of, you want to you just want to know this is,
Yeah.
when you have your first kid, your testosterone plummets and it never goes back. Every subsequent kid, it keeps dipping, and that you just got to learn to work with that, in some different ways. So yeah, there's groups for both. I tend to lead kind of more mixed groups for all kinds of men personally, but
Talk a little bit about the value of the longer term of these things. I guess we're touching on that a little bit about how you have that resource if something does go wrong and you need the help. But what I find in a lot of the groups that I lead is that some people are really into it at first and want to participate, look forward to it, are really big contributors, and then they just drift away. It's a lot like if you've done therapy or group therapy or a lot of
yep.
other things. There's you don't it's not like every meeting is like, oh my God, that was the best thing I ever did, I'm so glad I went. It's like every time I go because I know it's, but you go because it's a habit. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that, of how to how to motivate people to stay with it, or what the benefit is of staying in it longer than the 5 sessions that were really great and the sixth one that was kind of like, well, I could have been, doing, work or a million other things.
Yeah, totally. I've been in a whole bunch of different groups. The longest group I was in consistently was 10 years. I'm now back in a group I was in 14 years ago. They've kept meeting, so I'm getting to replug in there, which is amazing. But the benefit of a long-term group is intimacy. So it's a deep knowing of each other's history, patterns, wounding, and tendencies. So whether these are relational things that keep playing out with a spouse, or new relationships you're trying to form, or issues you're having with kids that keep replaying over and over, there's something really powerful to men who are holding our story and can contextualize where we are in it. Because one of the great gifts, right, of a men's group is feedback.
Mm-hmm.
It's when guys who love us share what they're seeing. It's that simple, right? They just share what they're seeing. Like, hey, you've talked before about you have this pattern of meeting partners and jumping into bed with them way too early, and then it goes off the rails pretty fast. And I noticed you're talking about moving in with this woman and it's been a month.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Right? Like that healthy, I know this is an issue for you, so I'm bringing it up here. And in a way, what that intimacy allows for, when we really know each other's stories, which for some men is quite a foreign feeling, it's the feeling of having men protecting us, looking out for us. Just
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, man, I'm seeing some of these red flag things and I love you so much. I'm going to presence this, which, it might be a little challenging to us. Like,
Yeah.
whoa, no, I don't want to look at that. But it's like, no, you need to look at that because we know where this pattern goes if you follow the same script. So that's one of the many benefits, is just that intimacy and knowing each other's stories and patterns and history is so powerful in being able to guide each other and support each other with important feedback. As is just the feeling, I would say, of belonging. It's such a simple one, but it's such a big one for so many men these days who don't necessarily know where we belong. A lot of the cultural and social institutions have kind of fallen away for a lot of men. And particularly once you become a dad and you have very little time to do anything, that space is even more rare and precious. I get so many guys coming to me who's like, I don't even know how to make a friend anymore. I don't have any time to make a friend. And in my group, as I was a new parent, just from a sheer logistical thing, I had 8 guys in my group in the one I was in for 10 years before I moved. And I simply did not have the time to keep up one-on-one relationships. And I was living in LA at the time. So just geographically, I could not spend the time to drive and see them and hang out, but to spend 2 hours every other week congregating with deep intention and purpose was very efficient for me. And in a lot of ways, I rode that through the COVID lockdowns, and I felt pretty inoculated because I was still seeing people. We just met in backyards, but I had a thread of connection and community that was still online. So it didn't hit me in the same way it hit some of my clients who were like, I haven't seen anyone for days.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm dying inside. And even past that, a lot of that stuff has stayed for men. So there's belonging, connection, the intimacy of men really knowing us. And, is I think particularly for us men, as I call it, the deep capacity of loving us enough to tell us when we have spinach in our teeth, right? That feeling of like someone reflects something to you and you're like, ooh, I feel a little embarrassed by that. But you're like, actually, thank you for being willing to make
Right.
me uncomfortable in that way. Because if you hadn't, I would have been walking around all day with spinach in my teeth and look like an idiot.
Yeah.
Most men I
Yeah.
know crave that.
Yeah, I think a lot of us think we have this internal voice, and we have like our best friend is in our head, and that person outside our head isn't always our best friend. And sometimes you need somebody else, even if you think it inside, you have some feeling about what is going on. Having somebody else verbalize it is a different kind of reaction. I think it also important is that whole the idea that like you just said about people not having friendships in the same way. I think you as a young dad, you probably very very much attuned to the fact that for a lot of guys that some of your single friends are left behind. You
Yeah.
move around geographically, and quite often, like you said, a lot of your friends become the school friends. And how deep are those? Or they're the
Yeah.
husbands of your best friend of your
So
spouse.
true.
And these relationships are, while they can be entertaining and fun in the moment, they're not always who you would choose or who would be the best people to relate to in the same way. I mean, like, back to my earlier point about like going out with the your spouse's best friend's husband and going out for having a beer with that person, thinking, well, we've had such a great time, having dinner a few times. It doesn't always work. And I think it is hard to find other men who are friends. That's just part of the modern world.
Totally. And again, because even if sometimes if we do interact with them, it's often through that triangulation thing. And we're
Yeah,
not
right,
really
right, right.
getting to know each other, right? It's like, yeah, we play bowling, but we don't really talk about anything. And so part of the power of a group is there's an intention. It's a choice, right? That's the difference between, the friends of my kids that we just end up having hang out with. It's not necessarily a relationship of choice in the same way. I wouldn't
Right.
necessarily choose to be friends with that kid's father in the same way as, yeah, these are men I'm choosing to invest in. I'm choosing to spend time with because, we're all aligned around wanting to be the best fathers or best men or best husbands we can be. And we know that that's really hard to do alone. And that, yeah, oftentimes we have a hard time seeing our own stuff. I can't tell you, man, how many times I've gone to men's group. Maybe my wife and I had a little tiff, a little conflict of some kind. I get into group, I'm all charged up about, I can't wait to explain
Have
how
them
it's her
pick my
fault.
side and tell me how
Yeah,
she was
yeah, right.
wrong and I was right.
And then the guys sit with me and they're listening, they're inquiring, and at some point maybe there's some pushback of like, oh hey, actually this part sounds like it might be a little bit more about you than even her. And I'm
Mhm.
like, what? Ah, right. And then there's like the realization of like, wow, no, actually I did have a part to play in that, and there is something for me to own here. And now rather than going home and having a fight with my wife, I get to go and reconnect because I got reoriented to what was important in my relationship. And that's
Yeah.
so key in these kind of contexts.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about masculinity because I have touched on this in a bunch of podcasts, not specifically on this, but it's something my son wants to explore. He's 20 years old and is also really concerned about what masculinity is and why men suddenly there's so many people just talking about we don't even need men. All
Yeah.
men are bad. What do you think of what are the values what are masculine values that men should ascribe to or are natural to our being as men?
Yeah, there's a lot of loaded terms when it comes to
Right.
these energies, masculine, feminine, cultural, spiritual, all these kinds of stuff. And what I
Left,
tend to
right,
point people
right.
to is, yeah, there's infinite ways to break this down, yin and yang, another popular one. That's not quite it, but it is similar. And part of the problem I think we're having right now is masculinity is being asked to just grow up a little bit, right? So it used to be masculinity was I provide and in return I get sex. It's basically it. Like that
Right.
was kind of the deal for a long time. That deal hasn't been adequate for the last 60, 70 years, right? As women and the feminine in particular were able to develop themselves and come out and be liberated from just being mothers. That, and no, I get to be a person. I get to have things I want. I get to have a career. I get to have desires. That changed the equation. And so men have been asked to grow up a little bit. And, I'm a very different father than my father was. My wife and I, not quite, she takes him a little more, but I have almost 40%, 50% some days childcare. Like I'm very involved with my kids' lives in a way a lot of men never were before.
Right.
Some of that's technological, right? We got breast pumps now, refrigeration. There's ways that, I can feed them that you couldn't necessarily do back in the day. Um, and what's being asked of us as men is just changing. And so, the most simple description, this is very simple and very kind of biggest picture, I say, for the masculine is three traits. It's being grounded, it's being open and sensitive, and it's being aware.
Mm.
And when we have all three of those things, it creates a type of directionality. And the masculine part of all of us, so no matter if you were born with female genitalia, male genitalia, whether you've been trans, gender fluid, we all have an inner masculine and an inner feminine, right? There's the part of us that observes, and there's the part of us that's in the experience.
Mm-hmm.
The masculine part of us tends to be the part that observes, kind of takes the perspective on the situation and then acts. And so masculinity, right, does tend to be pretty directive in terms of, I want to go in this direction. And the reason we want to go in that direction is masculinity inside of all of us is most concerned with freedom,
Mm.
peace, the relieving of tension. And so if we lead something, often the reason we're leading it is there's some tension we're trying to resolve in the world, inside of ourselves, in a relationship, whatever that might be. And the big shift that's happening right now is, as I say, what's so challenging, like maybe for your son, I mean, he's got you, so that's pretty awesome for him. Not every guy has that, right? But the models we were given, pretty outdated. The traditional macho, masculine, my way or the highway kind of guy, that's just,
Mm-hmm.
I go towards what I want and I damn the consequences. It's about me getting what I need. And obviously, in the history of the world, that masculine has caused a lot of harm in the world, right? Abusing women, children, the environment, other men, you name it. I call that the masculine disconnected from the heart. There's a lot of power. There's a lot of drive there. There's a lot of, I'm going to take it, right? But there's not a lot of connection, that openness, that what's the impact I'm having. The pendulum swang from there to, what we would kind of now call the nice guy. The, whoa, I've seen that. Or sometimes I was raised by that man and he beat me or hurt me, or was very violent to my mom or whatever that might be. So many men were raised having seen the consequences of that kind of man. So they swing the pendulum to the other side, which is, whoa, 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 I'm going to disconnect from that power. I want to be a safe space. I don't want to override anyone. I don't want to be dangerous. I want everything
Mm-hmm.
to be equal. And that evolutionarily, I think, is an advancement, but it's not advanced enough because then those guys end up feeling frustrated, resentful, not getting their needs met, often overlooked, all kinds of problems with that. And so there's been this kind of either or paradigm. And so new masculinity, healthy masculinity, I would say, it's when we have both connected to our awareness. So we have, not to be too crass, but we have our balls online, our power, our drive, our desire, including our sexual desire, but we have our heart online. We're attuning to people around us. We're aware of the impact our presence has on other people. We care. And that's all then connected to our awareness of where am I going in my life and what's most important in this moment. And when we have all three, a different kind of masculine leader comes online that is very powerful, very boundaried, but quite sensitive and open and has the capacity to feel and feel other people to be able to more effectively lead them, frankly, right? So we're actually in our bodies, not just in our heads, and that all comes online. And definitely count me as one of the people that right now thinks that we don't need less masculinity in the world. We need more healthy masculinity.
Right. Yeah.
Women, the feminine, they are working their asses off to keep this planet going. And they need some help, right? And us men, in fact, one of our great capacities and gifts, and I would say responsibilities right now, is to call forward other men. When we see other men acting from that disconnected place where they're causing harm, to come at those men, not with shame and judgment, but a calling to be more. It's like, hey, man, I see what's happening here, and I think you're hurting yourself and you're hurting these people. What needs to change here? And so we have a big responsibility, I think, for kind of growing up other men. And what I've seen in men's group is my work is the best way to do that is to go deep inside ourselves. It's take responsibility for our healing.
So I guess I was expecting also you might talk about some of the more the values that would come up, and I don't know, maybe they don't have a place in that paradigm of you know, protection, providing, fixing,
Sure.
those kind of things. Do you think those are inherently positive masculine values that connect with the paradigm that you're talking about?
Yeah. I mean, in some sense, I would call those more human values that they sometimes reverberate different in the feminine and the masculine. But, you could very simply, in some ways, most men I know are concerned with either making, protecting, or teaching.
Hmm.
Making something valuable for the world, protecting people that can't protect themselves, or teaching people capacities so they can grow themselves. And I think that is a very valuable thing, right? The one of the great gifts of the masculine is to create safety. Like really to create safety
Hmm.
in the world, which means I have to take a perspective on what's happening and figure out how to protect or keep it
Right.
safe. And most men I know, um, if we're not doing one of those three things, we don't feel on purpose and we feel depressed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, it's definitely a strange time in the world, especially in America today. I think in talking about what
Totally.
this is, because a lot of you can do some really horrible things in the name of protection and safety, but
Yep.
not without connecting to that empathy that you're talking about in the larger part of how we act in the world. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this, and I hope we've motivated a few people to at least consider doing a men's group of some type. I mean, like I lead one for men finding meaning over 55. I lead one for
Awesome.
dads of biracial kids. I do a positive intelligence group. They're intensely meaningful to the people who take part. And we have our ups and downs. We have people who drop out, and some people who really connect and are always there. But I think that people find meaning whatever they can get out of it. You do have a free hour-long coaching session that people can sign up for at evolutionary.min/talk. Uh, I always, whenever a coach volunteers to give an hour of their time, I always say, take advantage of this. The worst thing that can happen is you may have, one or two insights about what you're doing today. You can talk about anything in the world, and talking to you, you probably get an idea of what men's groups are out there, or maybe how to find one.
Absolutely. Exactly. What I say is, it's better to bring it. And even if you don't work with me, I can point you towards
Yeah,
what
yeah,
might resource you in
yeah,
your life. And that is deeply meaningful because for a lot of men, they're resistant to asking for any kind of
yeah,
help. And it doesn't mean you're weak. It just means, if we're having a problem learning something, we get training.
yeah.
And for a lot of men, we're just missing the training needed to be great fathers, to be great husbands, to just stay alive, in this day,
Yeah.
resourced and not grinding ourselves. So
That's
definitely reach
that's a
out.
great point. I probably don't say enough about coaches in general. I think every coach I've met just very generous in that they want. A lot of us are trying to make a living, obviously, but we really wanted to help people. And if the fit isn't with me, that doesn't mean I'm going to not like you. I mean, everybody has to find the right
Exactly.
person to be with, and most of us are just very, very happy to find somebody else in our network that would be the right fit if you or I aren't the one.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, thanks again. Evolutionary.men / talk. Jason Lange, pleasure talking with you today. You can find my coaching experiences at GreatDad.com / go. Okay. Until next time, stay strong.